Welcome back, and so glad to be back, and thank you for joining A Shark's Perspective. I am Kenneth Shark Kinney, your host and Chief Shark Officer. Let me tell you about an amazing sponsor who helps make this show possible. I hope that you'll take a look at Drips, the founders of conversational texting, where they use conversational AI to help you reach customers where they're most responsive, and that's on their phones. And working with major brands like 3-Day Blinds, Liberty Mutual, Credit Repair, and Gainsco, Drips is leading the way for some of the biggest brands in the world to improve engagement rates and outcomes for their prospects and customers. And now back to the show. What if we could go beyond the conversation about diversity and take real action? That's a question about a lot of sensitive subjects, not often easily answered by even a lot of diverse voices. So many times those conversations get drowned out by accusations from an author pushing an individual narrative. So how do we apply that conversation and look at universal themes to take real action moving forward? Super excited to welcome back for a third Pete, if you will, show with Mr. Rohit Bhargava, the Wall Street Journal best-selling author of Beyond Diversity, as well as the author of the Non-Obvious Megatrends series, a professor, a keynote speaker, an entrepreneur, and the founder and chief trend curator for the Non-Obvious Company. And on this episode, we'll discuss diversity, inclusion, conversations, storytelling, identity, culture, technology, leadership, the workplace, the future, the most diverse city in the U.S., Papua New Guinea, a little Telugu, California versus Texas, and a lot more. So let's tune into a Beyond Diversity marketer with a shark who swims in some pretty diverse waters on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. Rohit, welcome back for a third time on A Shark's Perspective. There'll be an awards ceremony afterwards, but welcome back. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Is this considered a hat trick now?
It is a hat trick, and
All
it's
right,
the
nice.
Mount Rushmore of podcast guests. And I also attribute it back to a former podcasting platform I was using allowed me to renumber episodes. So I have more than multiple episodes of you, but they're both, the previous ones were both named 86A and 86B. Then when I switched platforms, it wouldn't let me do it. So it screwed up, but I'm so glad to have you back on multiple episodes now that I know how to actually number them correctly. So I love this new book. And we've talked to you before when you had your previous books, the non-obvious books you wrote on trends. But this was a pretty hard pivot for you, going from 10 books on digital marketing and marketing trends to diversity. What was sort of your aha moment that made you realize this is a book that you needed to write at the right time?
Yeah, it does. I know for a lot of my audience, it does seem like a pretty big pivot because I'm known for talking about trends and seeing the world a little bit differently. And to me, this book was sort of like the prequel to Non-Obvious, because a lot of what I talked about in the Non-Obvious series was teaching people how to see the world differently. And really what this book is about is appreciating people who have perspectives that are not like yours. And I sort of touch on that in the Non-Obvious series, but this was a chance for me to team up with another amazing author, bring in a lot of contributors, and really do a deep dive on diversity and this sort of hot topic that everybody's been sort of wondering about and thinking about, and some people have been investing their time to do professionally in terms of helping companies to become more diverse and inclusive. And I wanted to do it in a way that respected kind of the background that I would be bringing to it as someone who is diverse but is not a diversity expert.
And I love the idea of that. And that's one of the things that drew me to the book, was the same reason why I named my show A Shark's Perspective. I wanted to look at things a lot differently than a lot of the traditional marketers and advertisers were doing. And my nickname was Shark, so that's why I called it A Shark's Perspective. But I also thought it was very interesting for somebody that's written 10 books on this and to not be what would be considered a diversity expert. We all share unique viewpoints on subjects. How did you and Jennifer Brown get together in the first place? And then how did you come upon agreeing to nearly 250 pages of content that you've got to share the same mindset to the most point on?
Well, teaming up with Jennifer was easy because we just had great chemistry right from the beginning. And she has done a lot of work over the last decade in teaching organizations to be more diverse and equitable and inclusive. And so this really was her world. And what I wanted to do was to try and take it out of the perception of, oh, wouldn't it be nice to have if we just had a more diverse and inclusive company or workplace, and more towards the wow, we're really missing out on an opportunity to be more innovative and to come up with better things and to reach more consumers and to widen our target audience because we're not diverse and inclusive. So, like, from my perspective, it was like, this is a business imperative. And that's the perspective I wanted to bring to it, because there are a lot of books talking about the moral imperative of this. And I believe that also. I mean, it is important to me that I live and I help create a world that is inclusive and equitable for everybody, because that's the world I want my kids to grow up in. But I think that there hasn't been enough discussion of why this actually can have an impact in making your career better, no matter who you are, or what perspective you come from, or making your company better, or to make the company more profitable. I mean, all of those things are real benefits of thinking in this way. And so we wanted to kind of talk about both sides of that.
Well, and you pulled together, trying to think how many months ago now the summit was,
It
from
was
the time we
January,
recorded.
so it was
Wow, was that far
almost a
long
year.
ago? Almost a year
Yeah,
ago.
yeah,
So I
yeah.
love that you pull together 200 speakers from a lot of diverse backgrounds, because for me as well, I'm not a person of color, but I do really appreciate a diversity of thought, which I thought you did a really good job, because I watched a lot of the sessions. A lot of people thought about this differently, but if you were to take a 30,000-foot kind of overarching view of the show itself and all of the thought, were there any topics that jumped out at you that surprised you? Maybe this was more important, was race or gender or sex or whatever it was. Did any one of those or more stand out to you?
Yeah, I mean, all of the above, I would say. I mean, one of the things that was a natural thought when we first decided to hold a virtual diversity summit was to have our sessions on topics that people were talking about. And so we'd have a session on women in tech. We'd have a session on racism in the workplace. And we intentionally decided not to do it that way. And instead, what we decided to do was look at these universal themes and then bring people from all different perspectives. So we had a session on what it means to be a diverse casting director in Hollywood and in TV shows. We had a session where we had stand-up comedians talking about whether diversity can be funny. We had a session on children's literature. We had a session on publishing. We had a session on public health, politics. I mean, these were the types of topics that we were talking about. And under each one of them, we had people coming from so many different perspectives. So it wasn't just race, gender, ethnicity. It was also people with disabilities. It was also people who suffered from ageism at work. So it was every dimension of this conversation about diversity, including the ones that are often left out.
Yeah, and I like the fact that you call this is not a research book, it's a do something book. Because like you're not obvious, at the end of every chapter, you point some real action items, what companies can do, what a person can do. And I thought that was fantastic. I remember watching one of the speakers, Mysoon Zaid, the comedian.
Yep.
Hilarious. One, I applaud you for welcoming in people with disabilities into the conversation. That's not spoken about nearly enough. I talk about this a lot on my own show. One of my best friends is disabled. I've got this in my family as well. But another point she made was she had a lot of individual diversity options, if you will, like being disabled, female, Palestinian, Muslim, a woman of color, divorced, and living in New Jersey, which I thought was a funny disability. She made a joke about, but she points about creating a safe place where people feel included. And everybody's got their own unique, diverse options, if you will. But a lot of people have a lot of diversity. You're diverse, Jennifer's diverse, my Soon's diverse. How do we create that safe place to where this hodgepodge of all kinds of diversity can really be appreciated and respected by all?
Well, I think it starts with not seeing diversity and inclusion as someone else's fight, because there's always someone else, no matter who. I mean, I am a person of color, but I'm not female, right? I don't have a disability. And so I fit into some groups, but not other groups. And I don't pretend to understand everyone's experience, but I do believe that we can all do more to welcome all of those different perspectives into the world that we inhabit, whether it's our workplace but also the stories that we choose to consume, right? And there's a lot of things that are under our personal control. I mean, the book that you choose to pick up and read is under your control. The TV show that you choose to watch, the film that you choose to stream on Netflix, these are all choices that you make. And if you reinforce the same worldview and you only watch or read things that are written for and by people who look like you're just reinforcing that same perspective, and you're missing out on a chance to be what I always call a non-obvious thinker. And so to me, what this book really tried to remind people of is that there's beauty in the ability to see all of these other perspectives and to welcome all these other people into your life, into your workplace, into the shows and content that you consume. And I think that we all have the chance to choose to do that. We just need a reminder sometimes.
Agreed. Yeah, no, I think it's a great point. So you and Jennifer wrote about 12 different themes across the spectrum. I'm going to run through them: storytelling, identity, family, culture, education, retail, the workplace, technology, entrepreneurship, leadership, government, and the future. Were any of those bigger aha moments when you dove into the research? Or I guess, where did you come up with that list of 12?
Each one did kind of have its own aha moments. I think that what is really fascinating for people is this is a book about diversity and inclusion. And what you didn't read in any of those 12 themes was disability, African Americans, women. That's not how we organized this book. We organized it in terms of storytelling or technology or government. And they're themes that cut across all of our lives. We're all impacted by these things. And so as we did these deep dives into each one, we found, wow, how much are the stories that we read shaped by the people who are allowed to tell those stories? And how has that shifted now in terms of giving other people the microphone? And how does that change the way that we interact with these stories when we get to consume them? Same thing in government, like who is representing us? And are they as diverse as they could be? We talked about the future. We did a deep dive into urban planning and ways that there was this, what's now kind of being called in media debates, in infrastructural racism. So these choices that were made decades ago that reinforce these boundaries that exist between cities that keep different people apart from one another. So all of these things were sort of micro aha moments, I guess I would say. I knew a little bit about them, but as we dug into the research and conversations and interviews and all of the things that we did to put this book together, it was just one fascination after another.
Sure. Well, one of the action items you mentioned in the book was leaning into the intersections of your own identity and becoming a role model. Elaborate on that, please, what your thoughts are around that.
So there is this really well-known concept of intersectionality, which was actually first introduced by an author and researcher named Kimberly Crenshaw. And what it essentially says is we are never one thing, we are multiple things. So I'm not just a person of color. I'm also male. I'm also a person of color. I'm also a father. I also come from a relatively affluent background in terms of just being able to afford whatever I want right now. And so all of these things are intersections that create my identity. And the more we try and define people by one thing, whether it's their sexual orientation or their gender or their ethnicity or where they grew up or the zip code that they come from, the less they are able to feel truly like themselves. And the more we create an atmosphere where people can have these intersections and exist as they are, the more people feel like they can show up as their true selves in life, in work, and everything in between.
Fair. So one of the things that I thought of in particular reading this book, and I was trying to pull myself out of it, but I was thinking about this in particular with workplaces, with companies, brands, organizations, et cetera. Where's the place that they need to get to feel like they're in a good place from a diversity and inclusion standpoint? Because there isn't an exact definition of this. There isn't an exact science, or not that there ever will be an endpoint, because it's always changing and evolving, but it's also something that people can measure and achieve without necessarily sticking their finger in the air to measure, what the wind direction is. And I say that not to trivialize it, to figure out where the wind's blowing, but it's also that a lot of companies may be of a large size and it's hard to pivot. This is not like changing out a piece of machinery It's changing out the way a lot of people think and feel and coexist with each other, especially in a workplace. How do you think a company can help get to where they feel good about what they're doing to make certain that their employees are appreciated, and probably a little bit of vice versa for a lot of employees to think, I'm in a good place where I work today?
Well, one of the concepts that Jennifer often talks about is the rule of threes. And what it essentially says is it's not enough to hire or include one person with a single perspective, because they're basically the sole voice that gets minimized in a conversation. So if you're looking at, for example, a boardroom, you can't just have one person who comes from a minority perspective. You need to have at least three in order to have enough of an impact. And it doesn't matter how vocal that one person is when you create that concept that, oh, we have one diverse person. Here's our diverse person. Check them out in the team photo. It creates this false sense that you've achieved an end goal, when actually that should just be seen as the beginning. And I think that's one of the big perspectives that we try and share in the book, that it's not about feeling like you hired one person who's diverse and now you're done. It takes more work than that.
Fair point. So, what was your biggest moment out of writing this book compared to what you went through when you were writing the non-obvious trends and megatrends?
Well, I think that, the biggest difference I would say is when I wrote non-obvious, and every year as I did a new version of it, that was my expertise. And the way that book was written is, I'm the expert. I've done these things and I'm going to teach you how to do this. And that was the perspective of that book. And that's why it's done so well for me commercially. That's why it drives so much of the speaking that I do, and has helped me to build a platform as an expert. Beyond Diversity was really a book to build a stage that other people could be featured on. And that was really fulfilling for me in a very different way, because I'm not the expert on this and I'm not trying to be. What I'm trying to do is shine a spotlight on all of the people whose stories you should know and whose perspectives you should hear, and put them together in a way that would be actionable and useful for people. And that's the biggest difference between this book and my last book.
Well, and probably, I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but I'm sure, because as now that we've got to know each other a little bit over the years, I'm sure a lot of it also impacts you as a dad, starting to think about, what's the kind of research that's really going to impact my relationship with my children and what I want them to learn on their own. That's something that obviously impacts me as my own family, as my own child, gets older in life. And so it's very interesting that you can start crystallizing what's really important in the world with where a lot of our research is.
Yeah, that was a huge piece of it for me. But I also had a bit of an awakening when it came to that, because we had a chapter all about family. And I never really thought about it, but I write about the future all the time, right? And when I write about the future, a lot of times I default to this kind of, it's not a cliche, but it's like a saying, right? Which is like, what is the future we want to create for our kids? And that would be my default place. I'd be like, we need to build this world for our kids. And what I realized through the process of writing this book is that there's a lot of people who care deeply about the future, but don't have kids, either by choice or by circumstance or whatever the reason is. And so focusing on this future for our kids actually alienates some people who care about the future and want to build a better future, but it's not because of their kids. And that was just one of those kind of micro blind spots that I was forced to confront in myself. That, I don't think anybody who would hear that would necessarily be offended that I talked about my kids when they don't have kids, right? So it's not deeply offensive in a way that some other things could be, but it still is not as inclusive as it could be. And so I started catching myself and I started thinking about those types of details, and trying to be conscious of the language I was using and whether it may unintentionally be excluding some people.
Do you think we're in a good place, though, in society? And I applaud you for putting a spotlight on it, not calling yourself the expert, because it would be very easy for a lot of people to have done that. Do you think we're in a good place to where we can have conversations today, though, about this? Because you often find that there are a lot of people who maybe feel like they're doing more than they're getting called out for. And I'm not trying to make a political statement, but as we go through this, A lot of times it's something you find out on your own, or other times it's something somebody's yelling at you on Twitter. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
When your conversation starts with an accusation, it's really tough to have a productive discussion after that. And so a lot of the books in this category, I mean, I've read a ton of books about diversity and inclusion, and a lot of them in the title even spotlight racism and call people racist and say you're a racist. Um, and when someone picks a book or a perspective from that point of view, it feels like an accusation against them. And anyone who's picking up a book like that probably isn't deeply racist. Otherwise, they wouldn't read that book in the first place. So it probably feels like an unfair accusation to them. And one of the things that we thought deeply about is how do we write about these really sensitive topics and talk about diversity and inclusion and racism in a way that doesn't feel like an accusation of the reader in a kind of big pronounced way, you're a racist, but even in a smaller way, as in you're not doing enough, and you should be doing more, and you should be waking up every day, talking about your own privilege and talking about the ways that you are not making the world more inclusive for everyone else. I mean, it's not a positive way to bring people into this conversation. And so we really thought a lot about how do we introduce this sensitive topic and get people to do more. I mean, that is the intent, right? We want people to do more, but how do we do it in a way that feels welcoming instead of an accusation?
Yeah, great point. So in the conclusion you wrote, I want to read something real quick. An inclusive world starts with each of us choosing to respect perspectives other than our own, treating everyone with respect, and choosing to stand up for others who need our support more than anything else. This is what going beyond diversity truly means. Excellent writing. I really enjoyed that comment. So, Rohit, we've done some of these questions before. Last time you chose the hammerhead shark, so I'm not going to ask you what your favorite shark is. However, it's again that time for the 5 most interesting and important questions that you're going to be asked today. Are you ready?
Okay. I hope so.
All right. Number 1, you live in the DC area, so this should be a good one. This goes back to a memory I had as well. Washington, DC or Houston, Texas?
I would have to say DC. I do like Houston, but I would have to say DC.
So Houston is considered the most diverse city in the country
That
based on
is
population.
interesting.
And DC, oddly enough, is 17th. Maybe because it only has, the blues and the reds that for the D's and the R's that
Yeah.
think probably
Yep.
too similarly. All right, number 2. These are going to be testing your diversity knowledge. Papua New Guinea or Indonesia?
I would say Papua New Guinea.
So Papua New Guinea is the most diverse country linguistically. I found this to be very interesting in the world. 840 languages spoken across a country the size of California. So very odd.
Yeah,
right.
That reminds me of India. That there's
Yeah.
so many different languages when you move from one region to the next
Exactly.
in India. It's crazy.
Yeah. I was always proud to tell people I knew a little bit of Telugu, and I just stick with that and not go any further.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
All right. Number 3, California or Texas?
It's a tough one. I'd say California.
So California is the most diverse state in the country by less than 1% more than Texas. A lot of people don't even realize how diverse Texas is. And they've had a huge, especially in the Southeast Texas over the last decade. So, all right. Number 4, more males or females in marketing and advertising today?
I would say female.
Females are correct. And I've gotten 50 different numbers. It was interesting doing a lot of research, but it has become a much more diverse, still not enough in the leadership at the top, but a lot more diversity than would have been, say, 10, 20 years ago.
So here's the thing. I was working in advertising 10, 20 years ago.
You were with Ogilvy and a bunch of
So let's see. I worked in advertising from about 2000 until 2015. And every one of my bosses was female except one in those 15 years time span. So even at that time, it felt like they were more women.
True. All right. I'm not going to ask you biscuits or cornbread. You did pick cornbread last time. So number 5 in the most
I would still pick cornbread.
You still pick cornbread, but number 5 in the most important question that you're going to be asked today. And I'm not talking about current book sales, okay? The non-obvious trend series or beyond diversity.
Well, we got to go with the latest book. I mean,
Yeah.
we just have to. That's a marketer's code that you'll appreciate right there.
I know.
That's the book I'm promoting right now. So of course,
I'm waiting for 9 more editions to come over the next decade, because this is one you could write for 100 years, and there'll be updates every year.
Volume 2 and volume 3 if we did do it. So
yeah. All right. Well, Rohit, where can people find out more about you, get a copy of the book, see you on stage, and more?
Well, so everything's available at nonobviousdiversity.com, just all one word. And you mentioned a couple times when we talked about the virtual summit, you can watch all the videos totally for free, straight from that website as well, and pick up a copy of the book, get an excerpt, get the audiobook version of the book. And we are also, in just a couple of weeks, going to have a large print edition of the book as well.
Fantastic. I'm going to include the summit on my website as well with a link. So Rohit, thank you again for being with us today on the 3rd time of A Shark's Perspective.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
So there was my conversation with Rohit Bhargava, the Wall Street Journal bestselling co-author of Beyond Diversity, as well as the author of the Non-Obvious Megatrends series, a professor, a keynote speaker, an entrepreneur, and the founder and chief trend curator for the Non-Obvious Company. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from my conversation with him. First, I've been a fan of much of Rohit's work on digital trends in the past. He used to talk about trends and how to look at the world a little bit differently. That non-obvious work extends to diversity. The views and opinions on diversity are diverse, to say the least, so it's hard for many to often come to agreement. But what I like in how Rohit, a marketer who is a diverse person but not a diversity expert, reminds us is that we need to appreciate people who have perspectives which are not like yours. Second, I applaud how the themes of this book were not shaped by narrative pushing this angle or that. Many to most diversity books often push a certain narrative. It's often buried deep, but you can uncover where the author is coming from. This book seemed to push more of the idea of going beyond diversity in conversation with universal themes and how to take real action in practical situations, whether it be through storytelling, technology, the workplace, etc. I don't agree with everything Rohit or Jennifer say, don't have to, and neither do you. They didn't intend that, but they fostered a conversation with how he described it earlier as a conversation on really sensitive topics. Well done from my point of view. Third, Rohit points out that it starts with not seeing diversity as someone else's fight. I'll paraphrase what he said. I don't pretend to understand everyone's experience, but we can all do more to welcome all of those different perspectives. Look, if you only reinforce the same point of view, then you may never see another perspective. This isn't a political statement or anything like that from me, but just from a marketing standpoint alone, we have to broaden our perspective with our customer base on that view. The press often gaslights us in a way meant to inflame audiences. Advertisers often do this as well. But what it doesn't do enough of is to open this up to a real conversation, which this book does, and taking action upon that real conversation is what's needed to move any diversity going forward. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@sharksperspective.com. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. I'm so thankful to everyone who listens. Thank you to my sponsor and the team at Drips. Please consider writing a review and letting me know your thoughts on the show. Reach out and let me know. It's time to go out there and dive into some diverse waters with a diverse species of sharks, over 500 of them. So please join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.